This video is to answer a question that Cameron asked about question 3C, I believe, in the oligopoly chapter of Bay. And basically, you get this kink demand curve that you see here. And the question basically says, what range of marginal cost would this oligopolist continue to charge $60? Now, as you could see, you've got two demand curves. And you could see that there's only parts of each demand curve that are relevant. And those parts are this. Let me just bring up my toolbar here. And I'm going to just focus our attention on the relevant parts of each demand curve. I'm going to make it red right here. So this is one demand curve right here, and the other one is right here. So this is the kink demand curve. In other words, when you're charging $60, they're producing 10 units. And when you raise price, you move along this part of the demand curve. And when you lower price from 60, you move along this part of the demand curve. Now, what you don't see here are your marginal revenue curves, because remember, for this firm, it's the same as perfect competition and oligopoly. You produce a rate of output where your marginal revenue equals your marginal cost. Let me make that a little bit bigger. So let's include our marginal revenue curves here. Well, each one of these demand curves, D2 and D1, has a corresponding marginal revenue curve. And remember, a marginal revenue curve for a linear demand curve is simply twice the slope of the demand curve. So for example, let's look at D2. The marginal revenue curve for D2 is going to slope twice as steep as D2. Now we could figure out what that is, because look, let's look at from 100 right here to 60. So you go down 40 and you go over 10. See, this is 10 right here. Well, if this is twice as steep, that means if you start here, you're going to cross this at 5. So let me draw a straight line. Straight line. I'm going to call this another color. I'll call this blue. And here's my marginal revenue curve. It's going to go here, and it's going to cross at this at 5. So that means it's if I cross, oops. Let me undo that. Let me undo again. I'm going to try that one more time. I'm going to start here and right there. So can you see how this crosses at 10 and this is crossing it at 5? That means this is twice as steep. Or in other words, if you extended this D2 curve, it would eventually hit right here at 25, which means this MR curve will hit around 12.5. It's twice as steep. Well, now let's draw the marginal revenue curve for D1. You could see if you start at 70, it crosses here at 10. So if we start at 70 and we cross at 5, we'll have the other demand curve. So let's start here and cross at 5, right? About there. Now we have a marginal revenue curve for each demand curve. This marginal revenue curve is associated with D2, it's twice as steep. This marginal revenue curve is associated with D1, it's twice as steep. But remember, only parts of each demand curve are relevant, which means only parts of each marginal revenue curve are relevant. So remember, this demand, part of the demand curve, D1 is relevant. So that means this MR curve is relevant. So let's get rid of the MR curve that we don't need. And I'm going to just make this white. Let's see if this works. Oops, undo. I'm going to make this white. And I'm going to make this a little wider. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the MR curve that we don't need. Right there. And of course, we don't need this MR curve, so I'll get rid of that too. So we'll get rid of this demand curve right there. And then let's get rid of the, so below the price of 60, this is the relevant D curve, which means this is the relevant MR curve. So let's get rid of the MR curve that we don't need. So that's going to be right here. And let's get rid of the D curve that we don't need. That's right here. So what we have here, let me just fill this in for you. Let's go to, we'll tighten this up a little bit. Let's go back to 6 points here. I'm going to go back to red. So this is our MR curve right here, right? Excuse me, our D curve. It goes like this. And this is our demand curve right there. So that's filled in nicely. And our MR curve, it was blue, right? It goes like this. Perfect. So, and we got this gap right here. And so let's draw a dotted line for this gap. I'm going to draw a dotted line right here. So the blue line is the MR curve, and you've got this gap right here. And the red line is the demand curve. So what you see here is if marginal cost, and let me draw another line for marginal cost. And I'll draw that line green. I'll make that solid. So you can see when the marginal cost curve crosses the MR curve, you could see the price is going to be 60 and the output is going to be 10. But if the marginal cost curve shifts upward, let's say it shifts upward to here, you could see that we're still going to charge 60 and we're still going to charge 10. So in other words, if this marginal cost curve shifts within this gap, price will not change. And that gap is from 50 to 20. So if marginal cost fluctuates between $50 and $20, you're not going to see any change in price for the product. So the question is, how did we figure this out? Well, we figured this out by drawing the MR curve and figuring out the width of this gap. And that told us how much marginal cost could fluctuate and not cause price to change. So I hope that clarifies things.